Steam locomotives were never supposed to look like this. For over a century, engineers took the same basic idea, a fire, a boiler, and a set of pistons, and pushed it into some of the strangest machines ever built. Some were designed to climb mountains no normal train could touch. Others were built to survive wars, fool the enemy, or squeeze more power out of an idea everyone thought was already finished. Today we're looking at the weirdest steam locomotives in history, and trust me, some of these will not look like trains at all. Before we get into it, if you're into strange machines and forgotten engineering, hit subscribe and drop a like on this video. It really helps the channel, and you will not want to miss what's coming up. The rack climber. Most trains rely on friction between steel wheels and steel rails, but on a steep enough slope, that friction simply isn't enough. That's the problem the Fell locomotive was built to solve. Instead of adding more driving wheels, engineers added an extra set of horizontal wheels that gripped a raised center rail running between the tracks. Those wheels didn't power the train forward, they clamped onto the rail for extra grip and braking on brutal mountain grades. Only one major line ever used this system, in New Zealand, hauling trains over a mountain pass so steep that ordinary locomotives simply couldn't hold on. It looked like a normal train wearing an extra pair of shoes, and for decades, it was the only thing keeping traffic moving over that mountain. The double engine. Imagine trying to build a locomotive so powerful that one boiler couldn't feed it fast enough. That was the challenge behind the Gerat locomotive. Instead of one rigid frame, engineers split the machine into two separate power units, one at each end, connected by a girder frame that carried a massive boiler in the middle. This bizarre layout let the locomotive bend around sharp curves like a normal train while still being enormous, since the weight was spread across two independent chassis instead of one long, rigid one. Gerrits ended up hauling some of the heaviest freight trains in Africa and Australia, places with mountainous terrain and tight curves where a conventional giant locomotive simply couldn't fit. It looked like two trains that had been welded together, and in a strange way, that's exactly what it was. The geared crawler steam locomotives were built for speed, right? Not this one. The Shay locomotive threw that idea out completely. Instead of connecting the wheels directly to the pistons like every normal steam engine, the Shay used a drive shaft and gears running down the side of the locomotive, almost like a truck. That meant it was painfully slow, but it could pull enormous loads up steep, rough logging grades that would have destroyed a conventional locomotive. Loggers in the mountains of North America loved it precisely because it wasn't fast. It was steady, flexible, and nearly impossible to derail on badly laid track. Sometimes the weirdest design wins by refusing to do what everyone else was doing. The fireless engine. Here's a steam locomotive that never lit a single fire. The fireless locomotive worked by filling its boiler with steam and hot water from an outside stationary plant, then sealing it up and running purely on stored pressure until it ran out. No firebox, no smoke, no coal at all. That made it perfect for factories handling explosive materials, like gunpowder plants or oil refineries, where a spark from a normal locomotive could cause a disaster. It could only run for a limited time before needing a refill, but for short shunting jobs inside dangerous facilities, it was the safest steam engine ever built, precisely because it wasn't really burning anything. The Camelback. This one looks like someone built the cab in the wrong place, and honestly, they kind of did. The Camelback locomotive placed the engineer's cab directly on top of the boiler, in the middle of the locomotive, instead of at the back. Why put a person on top of a giant steam boiler? Because these locomotives burned an unusual, hard-to-ignite type of coal that needed an enormous firebox, one too wide to straddle from a normal rear cab. The solution was to move the engineer forward and leave the fireman shoveling coal in a tiny separate cab at the very back, dangerously exposed to the elements with almost no protection. It solved one problem and created a much scarier one, and that trade-off eventually got the design banned. The hush-hush engine. The British called it the hush-hush because almost nobody outside the project was allowed to know what it actually was. The Lunar W1 was a one-of-a-kind experimental locomotive built with a high-pressure water tube boiler, technology borrowed more from ships than trains. Engineers hoped it would be dramatically more efficient than anything running on British rails. Instead, it turned out to be a maintenance nightmare, constantly leaking and difficult to keep sealed at such extreme pressure. It was eventually rebuilt with a conventional boiler and lost its strange shape entirely. For a few years, though, it ran the rails looking unlike anything else in Britain, a genuine steam secret hiding in plain sight. The turbine that almost worked. By the 1940s, some engineers were convinced pistons were outdated technology. The Pennsylvania Railroad's S2 tried to prove it by replacing the traditional piston system with a direct steam turbine, driving the wheels, no connecting rods, no pistons pounding up and down. On paper, it promised a smoother ride and less wasted energy. In practice, it guzzled coal at low speeds and only became efficient once it was already running fast, the exact opposite of how a locomotive actually operates pulling out of a station. It was retired after just a few years. A beautiful, thunderous experiment that proved turbines and trains don't always mix. The steam tank. Not every steam locomotive ran on rails at all. The Sentinel steam wagon looked more like a truck than a train, but underneath its cab sat a fully functional vertical steam boiler powering a chain drive to the wheels. Built for hauling heavy freight on ordinary roads, it worked almost like a road-going locomotive, complete with a firebox that needed constant tending while driving through traffic. Drivers had to manage water levels and coal the same way a train crew would, all while steering around corners and pedestrians. It's one of the strangest reminders that steam power wasn't just a railway story, it tried to take over the highways too. From mountain climbers, to floating fireboxes, to a train wearing a truck's body. Steam engineers spent over a century trying every wild idea imaginable to solve problems that seemed impossible. Most of these designs disappeared once diesel and electric power took over, but for a while, they proved that steam could be bent into almost any shape imaginable. If you enjoyed this trip through railway history, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one, and let me know in the comments which of these locomotives surprised you the most,